At 61, I thought I knew my daughter, Sarah, inside and out. For 9 years, since Clara died, I believed our bond was built on unwavering trust. That fundamental lie shattered with a single text from Sarah, right there in my North Raleigh kitchen, rain tapping the window. "Dad, please don't ask about Liam's parents anymore. They won't be at the brunch. It's better if you don't meet them." How quickly can a lifetime of trust unravel? In less than 72 hours, a wedding planner's seating chart revealed 2 unexpected names, a civil complaint exposed a pattern of predatory deals, and a faded memo from Clara's past surfaced, all connected. Liam, with his perfectly polished smile, had no idea his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story resonates with you, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I still remember the exact sound my phone made that Tuesday night. Not because it was loud, but because it changed everything. I had just poured myself a cup of coffee and settled into the old recliner by my kitchen window in my North Raleigh home. Rain tapped softly against the glass. The weather forecast had warned about another damp front moving across central North Carolina, and my right knee had been complaining since lunchtime. At 61, my joints usually knew what the meteorologists hadn't announced yet. My phone buzzed once. I smiled before picking it up. 3 days before your daughter's wedding, every message feels important. Then I read it. "Dad, please don't ask about Liam's parents anymore. They won't be at the brunch. It's better if you don't meet them." I read it again, then a third time. I even adjusted my reading glasses, thinking maybe I'd misunderstood a word. I hadn't. I sat there with the coffee growing colder in my hand. The kitchen suddenly felt much quieter than it had a minute earlier. 9 years earlier, after Clara died, I'd promised myself that Sarah would never feel like she'd lost both parents. I'd worked overtime on long-haul routes, cashed out vacation days, fixed my own roof, learned to braid hair from online videos, even though I wasn't very good at it. I'd paid for braces, college, her first apartment deposit, the transmission on her old sedan, half the pre-wedding brunch venue deposit. Yet somehow, knowing who my future son-in-law's parents were, had become too much to ask. I looked toward the mantel. Clara's picture sat where it always had. She was laughing in that photo, wearing the simple cotton dress she'd insisted wasn't flattering. I smiled despite myself. "You were wrong about that dress," I said quietly. The room, of course, didn't answer. After a while, I typed back, "Okay, just one word." No questions, no guilt, no argument. I set the phone face down. The silence that followed somehow hurt more than the message itself. Sarah called about 30 minutes later. "Dad. Hey, sweetheart. You aren't upset, are you?" There was hesitation in her voice. Not concern exactly. More like she was checking whether a problem had stayed contained. I said, "Okay. I know. It's just." She sighed. "Liam's family has complicated history. Everybody does. It's different." "I wasn't asking for medical records," I said with a small laugh. "I just figured parents usually meet before their kids get married." Another pause. "You'll understand someday." I almost smiled. "I hope so." She quickly changed the subject. "Don't forget dinner tomorrow." "I won't. Love you." "Love you, too." She hung up first. I stared at the dark screen. She'd said, "Love you." But she'd never answered my question. The next evening, I drove my old Ford F-250 into North Raleigh. The truck wasn't pretty anymore. The paint had faded. There was a dent behind the passenger door from backing into my own mailbox 7 years earlier. It still ran, kind of like me. The restaurant Liam had picked overlooked a small, man-made lake. It was modern, all polished concrete, hanging lights, and servers who somehow knew everybody's craft beer preferences. Sarah hugged me. She looked beautiful, happy, nervous. She'd inherited Clara's smile. For a moment, I forgot every uncomfortable text message. Then Liam arrived. He shook my hand with both of his. "Mr. Miller, you can call me David. I appreciate everything you've done for Sarah." His smile was polished. Too polished. The kind you practice. Dinner stayed pleasant through appetizers. Sarah talked about flower deliveries. I complained about North Carolina humidity. Liam told a story about a tech startup acquisition that made everyone laugh. If someone had walked by our table, they'd have thought we were an ordinary family. Maybe that's why I chose that moment. "So," I said casually while setting down my fork. "When do I finally get to meet your folks?" Sarah immediately looked at Liam. Not naturally, automatically, like she'd been waiting for him. He dabbed his mouth with a napkin before speaking. "David." His voice stayed calm. "My family has some old wounds." I nodded. "I understand. Sarah understands them, too." He leaned forward just slightly. "I hope you care enough about her not to dig into things that hurt people." The words were polite. The meaning wasn't. He hadn't answered me. He'd turned my question into something selfish. I noticed Sarah watching me, waiting, as though the next move belonged to me. I could have pushed. Instead, I asked quietly, "So, they're definitely not coming?" Sarah spoke before Liam could. "No." Then she added something that landed harder than she realized. "They come from a different world." I frowned. "What does that mean?" She looked embarrassed. She searched for the right words. "I don't want anything to get awkward." Awkward? Such a harmless little word. Except I knew exactly what she meant. She wasn't talking about Liam's parents. She was talking about me. The retired long-haul truck driver. The man whose jacket came from a discount store instead of a boutique. The man who still drove an old pickup. The man whose knee stiffened whenever he stood after dinner. For the first time since Clara died, I wondered if Sarah had started seeing me through someone else's eyes. I forced a smile. "Well, I suppose we all want the day to go smoothly." Relief washed across her face. She thought the conversation was over. So did Liam. Driving home, I took the slower route through my old neighborhood. The streets looked the same as they always had. Kids riding bicycles, porch lights glowing, somebody grilling despite the drizzle. Normal life. Exactly the kind of life Clara had loved. I parked in my driveway, but didn't go inside right away. Instead, I sat in the truck with the engine ticking as it cooled. Maybe I was being stubborn. Maybe Liam really did have family issues. Maybe Sarah was protecting everyone. I wanted to believe that. I truly did. Around 10 that night, my laptop chimed. The wedding planner. Probably another reminder about brunch times. I opened the email without thinking, then frowned. The subject line read, "Updated seating draft." She'd apparently sent it by mistake before sending the final version to the bridal party. I almost closed it. Instead, I glanced through the tables. Bridesmaids, groomsmen, Carol, my name. Then my eyes stopped. Table 4. 2 names. G. Sterling. M. Sterling. I blinked. Scrolled back up. Then down again. No, I wasn't imagining it. Sterling. Not Merritt. Not attending. Not blank. 2 reserved seats. I leaned closer to the screen. My heartbeat slowed instead of speeding up. That's always been my curse. When something feels terribly wrong, I become calmer. I printed the seating chart, laid it beside my coffee cup, read every line again. The planner hadn't marked them absent. She'd assigned them seats. Someone expected those two people to be there, which meant someone had lied. I looked toward Clara's photograph. The house felt unusually still. Outside, rainwater dripped steadily from the gutters. Inside, I stared at two names I'd never heard before 20 seconds earlier. G. Sterling. M. Sterling. I picked up the paper again. Then I quietly spoke into the empty living room. Something's wrong, Clara. I swallowed. And I think our daughter is standing right in the middle of it. The next morning, I almost convinced myself to let it go. I woke up at 6 like I always did, even though I'd been retired for almost 4 years. Old habits don't disappear just because your paycheck does. I shuffled into the kitchen, fed the robin that visited my back deck every morning, and listened to the local radio while scrambling 2 eggs. By 8, I had a legal pad sitting beside my coffee. On the top line, I'd written one question. Who are the Sterlings? I stared at it for a full minute. Then I crossed it out. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe Liam's family had reasons they didn't want strangers digging into their lives. Maybe I was becoming one of those old men who couldn't accept that their children had grown up. I folded the legal pad shut. I'm done, I told myself. 5 minutes later, I grabbed my truck keys. The North Carolina Secretary of State's office wasn't exactly where most people would spend a Wednesday morning, but I'd spent 36 years working for a trucking company. I knew one thing about government records. Most ordinary information wasn't secret. You just had to know where to look. The woman behind the public records counter smiled politely. Can I help you? I'm trying to locate a business registration. She slid a keyboard toward me. You can search the public database right there. No questions, no suspicious looks, just public information available to anyone willing to sit down and search. I typed in Sterling. More than 80 results appeared. So much for being clever, I muttered. The first entry belonged to a retired couple in Asheville. The second had been sold 5 years earlier. Another Sterling owned a small chain of dry cleaners nearly an hour away. None of them meant anything. After almost 90 minutes, my neck hurt from leaning over the monitor. I rubbed my knee and laughed quietly. What are you doing, David? The woman at the counter looked over. You okay? Just realizing retirement gives a man too much free time. She chuckled. You'd be surprised how many people come in here trying to solve family mysteries. I hope most of them find happier endings, she smiled kindly. I hope so, too. I stopped for lunch at a small diner on Capitol Boulevard. The waitress recognized me. The usual. You remember. You always order the Reuben and ask for extra sauerkraut. Guess I'm predictable. She poured fresh coffee. You look like you've got something on your mind. My daughter gets married Saturday. Her face brightened. That's wonderful. It should be. The words slipped out before I could stop them. She didn't pry. She simply refilled my cup and said, sometimes weddings bring out strange things in families. Funny how complete strangers can say exactly what you need to hear. By early afternoon, I decided the search had been foolish. I was halfway home when my phone rang. Carol. Clara's younger sister never called just to chat. You sound tired, she said the moment I answered. I've been chasing ghosts. What kind? I told her everything. The text message, dinner, the seating chart, the name Sterling. She stayed quiet for several seconds. Then she asked one question. Did you say Sterling? Yeah. Marcia Sterling? I don't know. Silence again. Longer this time. Finally, she spoke slower than usual. David. I haven't heard that last name in years. Something tightened in my chest. Why? You remember all those papers after Clara died? Of course, I remembered. Boxes of paperwork, lawyers, insurance forms, settlement agreements I'd signed because I couldn't afford years of court battles. Carol continued. I could swear Marcia was the director of student services at Apex Tech when Clara was there. I pulled onto the shoulder without realizing it. What? I may be wrong. No, you don't say something like that unless you're remembering something. I remember because I hated her. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Carol. I think Apex Tech's director of student services was named Marcia Sterling before she moved on. The world outside my windshield suddenly felt very quiet. Cars kept driving past. A lawn crew trimmed bushes across the street. Life continued. Mine didn't. I drove back toward the Secretary of State's office instead of home. This time I searched differently. Not Sterling. Sterling Holdings. Nothing. Then I tried LLC. Several companies appeared. Most weren't relevant. One caught my attention. Sterling Enterprises LLC. Registered address. Cary. I clicked deeper. The listed managing member, Glenn A. Sterling. Not Merritt. Sterling. The address sat less than 20 minutes from my own house. 20 minutes. Sarah had told me Liam's parents wouldn't be at the brunch. She'd never mentioned they practically lived around the corner. Rain started falling again as I drove north toward Cary. Not heavy rain. The kind that hangs in the air like mist. My knee throbbed every time I moved from the gas pedal to the brake. By the time I reached a gas station, I'd had enough. I parked, bought a bottle of water, 2 pain relievers, and the largest coffee they sold. The young cashier smiled. Long day. You have no idea. She laughed politely. I carried everything back to the truck. For several minutes, I just sat there drinking coffee, watching people load groceries, watching parents buckle children into SUVs, watching ordinary life continue. I am entirely too old, I muttered aloud, to be sitting in a grocery store parking lot playing detective. I almost started the engine. Instead, I drove the remaining mile. The neighborhood surprised me. Tree-lined streets, large brick homes, fresh landscaping, not flashy, quiet wealth. I parked across the street. Nothing happened for nearly 15 minutes. I began wondering whether I'd made another mistake. Then a sleek black luxury sedan pulled into the driveway. Liam climbed out. He wasn't alone. Sarah stepped out from the passenger side. She laughed at something he said. The front door opened. A woman in her 60s hurried outside. Sarah hugged her. Not politely, not formally. The kind of hug you give someone you've known for a while. A tall, gray-haired man followed. Liam slapped him on the shoulder. They looked completely comfortable together, like family. Not strangers hiding painful history. Family. I felt something sink inside me. Sarah knew. She hadn't simply repeated Liam's story. She had looked me in the eye and lied. About 20 minutes later, the 4 of them climbed into 2 vehicles. I stayed several cars behind, not because I wanted to spy, but because I needed to understand. They stopped at a modern bistro tucked between an artisanal bakery and a high-end pharmacy. I didn't go inside. Instead, I took a booth near the front window where I could see reflections in the glass. Most of their conversation disappeared beneath clattering dishes and coffee cups. But now and then a sentence drifted across the room. After the ceremony, he'll come around. The house is the cleanest collateral. I frowned. House. Then another voice. Probably Glenn. Old accusations don't resurface unless someone funds the digging. My stomach tightened. I couldn't tell what accusation they meant, but something about the way he said it felt rehearsed, like experience talking. The waitress brought my pie. I barely touched it. Across the room, Liam removed a folder from his briefcase. He slid several papers toward Sarah. She skimmed them for only a few seconds, then signed. No hesitation, no questions, just signed. When she turned the pages, I caught a few words from where I sat. Family asset transfer, premarital planning. At the bottom of another page, Sterling Enterprises. I couldn't read anything else, but I didn't need to. Whatever she had signed involved his family, not mine, not yet. Still, my instincts told me this wasn't about wedding flowers or honeymoon reservations. Then I heard something that froze me in place. Marcia lowered her voice, almost a whisper. Yet the words carried just enough. Apex Tech taught us one thing. She smiled. People forget when they're tired enough. The fork slipped from my hand onto the plate. Apex Tech. I hadn't spoken those two words aloud in years. That was where Clara had gone to teach an evening class in graphic design years ago. That was where a young student, burdened by debt and false promises, had taken his own life, a tragedy that led to a quiet settlement. The sound of dishes faded around me. For one impossible second, I could almost hear the phone call I'd received at 2:14 that morning 9 years ago. Mr. Miller, I'm sorry. There were complications. I paid my bill without finishing the pie. I drove home in silence. The house smelled exactly the way it always did. Old books, coffee, cedar from the hallway closet. I walked straight to the linen closet where I'd stored the box I'd promised myself never to open again. Clara's file box, student records, insurance papers, letters from attorneys, the settlement agreement. I carried it to the kitchen table. Dust floated into the light as I lifted the lid. My hands shook. Not from age, from memory. One folder after another. Course schedules, enrollment forms, legal correspondence. Then halfway down the stack, a faded internal memo, yellow with age. I stared at the signature. My breathing stopped. At the bottom of the page in neat blue ink were 5 words I'd never expected to see again. Marcia Sterling, Director of Student Services. I slowly lowered myself into the chair. Outside rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, the past had just walked back into my life. I barely slept that night. The rain had finally stopped, but every time the house settled with its usual creaks, I opened my eyes and looked toward the hallway. Clara's file box sat on the kitchen table exactly where I'd left it. For 9 years, it had lived in a linen closet behind extra towels and an old holiday tablecloth. I told myself I kept it because throwing it away felt wrong. The truth was simpler. I wasn't ready to read it again. At 6:30, I made coffee, toasted 2 slices of wheat bread, and sat down across from the cardboard box. Its edges had softened with age. Clara's handwriting still covered the lid. Apex Tech don't lose. I smiled despite everything. Still organizing my life, I whispered. Then I opened it. The first folder held course invoices. The second was student enrollment paperwork for her graphic design class. The third contained sympathy cards that I'd never had the heart to throw away. Under those sat a thick envelope from the attorney who handled the settlement. I remembered every meeting, every bill, every conversation that ended with the same sentence. Mr. Miller, continuing this case could cost tens of thousands of dollars. Back then, I'd still been paying Sarah's tuition, the mortgage, medical bills that insurance hadn't covered. I simply couldn't afford to fight forever. So, I'd signed. Not because I believed Apex Tech had done nothing wrong. Because grief had made me tired enough to surrender. Now, Marcia's words echoed in my head. People forget when they're tired enough. I closed my eyes. Maybe that hadn't been a casual remark after all. Maybe it had been a philosophy. By mid-morning, the kitchen table had disappeared beneath stacks of paper, enrollment logs, loan correspondence, copies of incident reports, letters between lawyers. Then I found something I'd completely forgotten, an internal memo. The paper had yellowed around the edges. Across the bottom was the signature I'd recognized the night before. Marcia Sterling, Director of Student Services. My fingers lingered over the blue ink. I wasn't looking at proof of a crime. Not even close. But I was looking at proof that Liam's mother hadn't simply crossed paths with my family years ago. She had been one of the people running the place where that young man, burdened by debt and false promises, had ended his life, a place where Clara had taught and where I had sought answers. That wasn't coincidence anymore. It was connection. Around 10, I called Carol. She answered on the second ring. "Tell me you found something." "I found Marcia's signature." Carol didn't speak. "I knew it," she finally said. "You really remembered her." "I remembered because she scared people. Scared the instructors, the students, even the lawyers acted differently whenever her name came up." I leaned back in my chair. "Why didn't we keep fighting?" Carol sighed. "You were exhausted. So was I. They delayed everything. Records took months. Employees suddenly couldn't remember conversations." She paused. "And then they offered enough money to cover the bills." I knew exactly what she meant. Not enough to feel like justice. Just enough to make survival possible. "They didn't convince us they were innocent," Carol said quietly. "They convinced us we couldn't afford to prove they weren't." Before hanging up, she surprised me. "You should talk to Patricia." I frowned. "Who's Patricia?" "Patricia Wells. One of the counselors. If she's still alive, she'll remember every crooked administrator she ever worked under." "You think she'll talk?" "If anyone will, it's Patricia." Finding Patricia took most of the afternoon. She lived in a senior apartment complex in Cary. The building wasn't fancy, but flower pots lined the entrance, and someone had hung tiny American flags along the walkway. By the time I climbed the front steps, my knee was protesting loudly. An elderly man watering tomatoes pointed toward apartment 214. "You're looking for Patty?" "I hope so. Tell her Frank says she's still cheating at bingo." He grinned before returning to his tomatoes. Patricia opened the door with a bright red lipstick that somehow made her look younger than 72. A silver walker stood beside her. She studied me for several seconds. "You look familiar." "I'm David Miller. My wife was Clara." Her expression changed immediately. "Oh." She stepped aside. "You'd better come in." Her apartment smelled like lemon polish and fresh coffee. Family photographs covered one wall. A tiny radio played old country music in the background. Without asking, she placed 2 cookies on a plate between us. "They're stale," she warned. "I baked them Monday. They'll still beat institutional food." She laughed. "I like you already." After a few minutes of polite conversation, I finally asked the question that had brought me there. "Did you know Marcia Sterling?" Patricia stopped smiling. "Oh, I knew Marcia." She folded her hands. "Too well." For the next hour, she talked while I mostly listened. Marcia rarely raised her voice. She didn't need to. She walked the halls in high heels that clicked against the tile floors. Whenever employees heard those footsteps, conversation stopped. Everyone straightened up. Nobody wanted to become the next target. "Glenn handled the finances," Patricia said. "Marcia handled fear." I wrote that sentence down. Then Patricia said something else. "Your wife wasn't the only family that asked difficult questions." I looked up. There were loan discrepancies. Enrollment irregularities. She nodded slowly. "More than there should have been." "Were they covered up?" "They were cleaned up." The wording caught my attention. Cleaned up. Reports rewritten. Dates corrected. Missing initials added later. She looked me straight in the eye. I never saw anyone forge official documents, but I saw plenty of paperwork become tidier. She stood, carefully shuffled toward an old filing cabinet and removed a thin folder. I kept a few things. Inside wasn't confidential student information. Instead, there were staff newsletters, newspaper clippings, handwritten diary notes, and copies of memos employees had received years earlier. One memo immediately caught my eye. Its subject line read, "Reconcile student loan logs before outside review." At the bottom, Marcia Sterling, Director of Student Services. Patricia smiled without humor. I kept that because it never sat right with me. It isn't proof of wrongdoing. I know, but it proves how they thought. Exactly. No smoking gun, just another piece of a pattern. As we talked, another unexpected name came up. Did Liam ever come around? Patricia nodded. When he was 15 or 16. What was he doing there? Helping his parents. She gave a dry laugh. At least that's what they called it. She remembered seeing him in the office after school, making copies, running errands, answering phones. Then she frowned. There was one incident. What happened? A student's parent couldn't find paperwork for their tuition assistance. And I later found Liam practicing someone's signature on scratch paper. I blinked. Did anyone report it? He was a teenager. His parents owned the place. No one wanted to lose a paycheck over something everyone called harmless. Patricia slowly shook her head. Sometimes people don't become dishonest overnight. They grow up believing rules belong to other people. That sentence stayed with me. As I prepared to leave, Patricia reached into the folder one last time. I almost forgot. She handed me a photocopy of a civil complaint filed 3 years earlier. The names at the top made my stomach tighten. Liam Sterling, Glenn Sterling. The lawsuit involved an elderly widow. According to the complaint, she'd been pressured into selling her home to an LLC for far below market value. The case had eventually settled. No admission of wrongdoing, just another quiet ending. Another family too tired to keep fighting. I folded the document carefully. This wasn't about Clara anymore. Or at least it wasn't only about Clara. Patricia walked me to the apartment door. Before I stepped outside, she rested one hand on my sleeve. David. I turned. If your daughter marries into that family, she looked at me with the certainty of someone who had watched too many lives fall apart. They won't just take your house. A long silence settled between us. Then she finished. They'll teach her to call it love. I drove home with the radio off. For the first time since Sarah announced her engagement, I wasn't asking whether something was wrong. I was asking how much time I had left to stop it. By Thursday morning, my kitchen looked less like a kitchen and more like the back room of a failing law office. Papers covered the table. Clara's file box sat open beside my cold coffee. Patricia's memo was clipped to the civil complaint against Liam and Glenn. The seating chart with G, Sterling and M, Sterling had a yellow sticky note on it because my hands had started shaking every time I looked at those names. I knew enough to be angry, but I also knew enough to be dangerous to myself. There is a kind of anger that makes a man feel clear-headed when he is not. I had seen it at the trucking company plenty of times. A supervisor gets humiliated. A driver gets written up. A customer starts yelling. And suddenly somebody who had been steady for 20 years says the one sentence that ruins his job. I couldn't afford that. Not with Sarah. Not with Clara's name. So I called Denise Kaplan. Denise had handled my updated will 2 years earlier. She was 57, sharp as a paper cut, and had a way of looking over her glasses that made grown men sit up straighter. Her office was downtown Raleigh on the 5th floor of a brick building that smelled like old carpet and printer toner. When I walked in carrying Clara's file box, Denise didn't smile. She pointed to the chair. Sit down before your knee gives out. That obvious? David, you're walking like a man who lost a fight with a staircase. I lowered myself into the chair and placed the box on her desk. I need you to tell me if I'm crazy. She opened the box. Those are never my favorite consultations. For almost 40 minutes, she read while I talked. I told her about Sarah's text, the dinner, the seating chart, the Carey house, the bistro, Apex Tech, Patricia Wells, the old memo, the new civil complaint. Denise did not interrupt much. She took notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally circling something twice. When I finished, she leaned back and removed her glasses. David, that bad? It's bad enough that you need to be careful. I felt my jaw tighten. You think I'm imagining this? No. She tapped the papers. I think there are patterns here. I think there are financial red flags. I think Liam and his family have avoided full transparency with your daughter. I also think if you walk into that pre-wedding brunch and accuse these people of causing the student's death, they will make you look unstable before dessert. The words hit harder than I expected. Unstable? Yes. Because you're the widower. Because you're the father of the bride. Because you followed them to Carey. Because grief gives dishonest people an easy costume to put on you. I stared at Clara's memo. Denise's voice softened. You don't need a scene, David. You need proof. I have proof. You have pieces. Pieces matter, but they need to be used correctly. I rubbed both hands over my face. What do I do? She pushed the seating chart back toward me. First, you stop chasing them. I wasn't. She raised one eyebrow. I closed my mouth. Second, she said, we make this about current financial disclosure, not old grief. The Apex Tech incident may matter. It may matter a lot, but if your immediate goal is protecting Sarah and your assets, then the cleanest doorway is financial transparency. I looked up. Prenup, asset review, debt disclosure, LLC disclosure. Anything Liam refuses to reveal becomes useful. For the first time in 2 days, my anger had somewhere to go besides my chest. Denise slid a blank pad toward me. Tell Sarah you want to give her a wedding gift. What kind? A legal consultation, family planning, protecting her future. Make it sound boring and generous. That feels dishonest. It is strategic. I've never been good at that. I know, she said. That's why you hired me. I almost laughed. Almost. Then my phone buzzed. Sarah. I looked at Denise. She nodded once. Answer it. I did. Before I could say hello, Sarah's voice came through, tight and sharp. Dad, what did you do? My stomach dropped. What are you talking about? Liam says you were outside his parents' house. Denise closed her eyes like she had already expected this. I stood slowly. Sarah, you followed us. I saw something that concerned me. You followed us? She repeated, louder. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to learn your daughter lied about people living 20 minutes away? Silence. Then she said, you don't understand. No, I don't. You're trying to ruin this because you don't trust anyone. That isn't fair. You never moved on after Mom. That one landed. I gripped the phone harder. Sarah kept going, her voice cracking now. And now you're dragging her into this, too. I looked at the memo on Denise's desk. I didn't drag your mother into anything. Mom would be ashamed of you. For a second, the whole office disappeared. I saw Sarah, at 20 years old, standing beside Clara's grave in a black dress too thin for the October wind. I saw myself putting one arm around her while she shook so hard I thought she might fall. I had spent 9 years trying not to lose that girl. And there she was on the phone sounding like a stranger repeating someone else's script. Denise watched me carefully. I took one breath, then another. You're angry. I said. Of course I'm angry. Come over tonight. No. Bring Liam. Absolutely not. I want to offer you both something. That paused her. What? A wedding gift? Legal planning? If you two are starting a life together, maybe I should help you do it right. There was suspicion in her silence. What does that mean? It means Denise Kaplan can meet with all of us tomorrow morning. We'll talk about the house, inheritance, anything that needs protecting. You're serious? I am. And you'll stop digging. Denise's eyes sharpened. I did not answer the way Sarah wanted. I'll stop guessing. That was true enough. Liam arrived at Denise's office Friday morning in a suit that probably cost more than my first truck. Sarah came in beside him, pale and tired, with her engagement ring catching the fluorescent light every time she moved her hand. Liam smiled at Denise. Thank you for making time. David can be very protective. Denise didn't smile back. That's often a parent's job. He gave a small chuckle. Of course. I sat quietly. That was the hardest part. Liam expected anger. He expected accusations. He was ready for an emotional old man. So, I gave him paperwork instead. Denise began calmly. David has asked me to help clarify estate and asset planning before the wedding. If any family property is ever transferred, we want Sarah protected. Liam leaned forward. Absolutely. I've been saying the same thing. Emily glanced at him. He continued too quickly. Transparency is important, especially with a home involved. Denise made a note. What home are you referring to? Liam blinked once. David's. I kept my face still. Denise nodded. What is your understanding of its value? Well, North Raleigh has gone up. Depending on condition, maybe 450, 500,000. Sarah looked at me then. I could see the question in her face. How did he know that? Denise turned to Liam. Is there a mortgage? Liam smiled. That would be David's information. But you asked about anticipated transfer timing, correct? His smile thinned. I don't think I used those words. No, Denise said, I did. The room went quiet. Then Denise placed a clean form in front of him. For a prenuptial agreement involving potential family assets, we would need full disclosure of debt, business interests, LLC connections, pending claims, and any family entities that might affect Sarah after marriage. Liam's fingers stopped moving. Sarah looked between them. What LLC connections? Liam laughed lightly. Standard legal language, sweetie. Denise kept her tone pleasant. Sterling Enterprises LLC would be one example. The color left his face just enough for me to notice. He recovered quickly. I don't know why that would be relevant. Then disclosure should be simple. His jaw worked. That's private family business. Sarah's voice was quiet. Liam. He turned to her, instantly soft. Baby, this is exactly what I meant. Your father is turning a gift into an interrogation. I almost spoke. Denise touched the edge of my sleeve under the table. So, I stayed silent. Liam stood. I need to take a call. His phone had not rung. He stepped into the hallway, but the old office door did not close all the way. His voice dropped. Not enough. They're asking about Sterling Enterprises. Sarah's head turned slowly. Liam continued from the hall. No, I didn't tell her that part. The silence in the room became a living thing. Sarah stared at the door, then at Denise, then at me. What part? She whispered. I wanted to reach for her hand. I didn't. A few seconds later, Liam came back in, smiling. But Sarah had changed. Not completely. Not enough. But something had cracked. I need time, she said suddenly. Liam froze. What? I said, I need time. Sarah, don't let them. I need time. She grabbed her purse and walked out. Liam looked at me then, and for the first time, the politeness was gone. You don't know what you're doing. I stood carefully, feeling every inch of pain in my knee. No, I said, but I'm learning. That night at 9:37, Denise called. I had just turned off the porch light. What did you find? I asked. She didn't waste words. Sterling Enterprises is tied to a bridge loan application. What does that mean? It means someone is borrowing against expected money. My mouth went dry. What expected money? An anticipated family asset transfer. I leaned against the kitchen counter. Meaning, that's the implication. And Sarah. Denise was quiet for half a second. Long enough. David, this isn't just a bad fiancé. I looked again at Clara's picture on the mantel. Denise finished in a voice as cold as North Carolina rain. This is a business plan, and your daughter is part of the paperwork. Lessons from this story. Trust can be easily shattered by deception. Parental instincts often reveal hidden truths. Dishonest patterns of behavior can repeat across generations. Strategic legal action is crucial when emotional appeals fail.